Hey guys, welcome to yet another tutorial on Spring AOP. In the previous few tutorials, we have written an aspect, we have written some advice methods, and we have written point cuts to configure those advice methods to run at particular points in the execution. This tutorial will look at some of the point cut expressions. We covered a few ways in which we can write point cut expressions. I'm going to cover a few other topics related to how we can write point cut expressions, and we'll also look at some of the best practices when it comes to writing point cut expressions in a real world application. We saw the execution point cut expression. So you write a point cut where you say you want the point cut to be the execution of a particular method or a set of methods. Then what happens is Spring will advise those methods, and then these advise methods will run before those methods get executed. But there are other ways in which we can write such point cut expressions. Depending on the need and the complexity, you can choose one or the other. So execution is just one of them. I'll quickly talk about a few others now. So let's take the example of the circle class. Now let's say I have a requirement that I want to write an advice that applies to all the methods inside the circle class. So let's say I want this logging advice to get executed for all the circle class methods. Now, the way I can do that is, of course, by writing a point cut expression, which is something like this: at point cut execution of, now irrespective of whether it's a public or anything else, irrespective of the return type, and irrespective of the method name, and irrespective of the parameters. All that I need to say is only methods of the circle. So for that, all I do is I say circle dot star. So what I'm saying is I'm not specifying whether it's a public or protected or whatever. I'm not specifying whether it's returning a string or a boolean, no matter whatever is the return type. I'm just saying for this class, no matter what the method name is and no matter what the parameters are, I want a point cut to be created for that. So now I can write this point cut as all circle methods. It's a descriptive name to give for this point cut. Now I can use this point cut and I can advise, I can configure my logging advice to run for all the point cuts which have been defined for this all circle methods. Well, there's another way we can do this, and that is, let me remove this. It's by using a point cut expression called within. Within lets us specify a particular class within which you want this point cut to apply for all the methods. So let's say I want a point cut to apply for all the methods within the circle. Then what I do is I specify within and I give the class name again. Okay, so now what happens is this point cut will apply to all the methods within the circle class. So no matter if you have 100 methods here, it's going to apply for all those methods. Now, what's the advantage of doing something like this? First of all, it's more readable. If you write an execution, you would think of the point cut being definition for which execution that you're concerned about. But if you're writing a within, it's obvious that you want this point cut to get executed for all methods within something. So this is kind of documents what you're trying to do here. So this is a better way to use it. If you have some use case like this. And of course, the other things that we discussed about, the wildcards and all the other concepts still apply for within. Now, let's say I want to apply this point cut for all the methods of all the objects inside my model package. Now let's say I have a few other classes over here, and I want the point cut to apply for all the classes and all the methods of those classes inside the model package. So in that case, what I can do is I can use a star over here, which means it applies for all the classes inside the model package. Now if I have sub packages over here, now let's say I have another package inside it, and I want this to apply for the classes inside the sub package as well, then I do a dot dot here. Again, just like the dot dot inside a method parameter, what this dot dot says is it can be the class at the root package, or it can be sub packages. So it's 0 or more. That's what the dot dot means. So this makes sure that your point cut is configured for all the classes in the package as well as in the sub packages. So I'll change this back to circle. So this still applies now. So now this point cut is for all the circle methods. So one thing to note here is that within takes the parameter as the class or a wildcard that describes classes, whereas execution takes the parameter as method names or wildcards that describe method names. So here you see the parameter is a circle, or you can have a dot star, but it all means class names. So it is within classes. So that's the reason why the argument has to define class names, whereas when you look at execution, you're actually writing about method names. So this is a good distinction to make. So save this. So apart from within, there are a few other point cut expressions that you can use. I'll just quickly go over some of them, and then you can actually look at the Spring documentation for more details. I would not be going through examples for each of them, but I'll just introduce you to them so that you can look it up in the documentation. So the next point cut expression that we will talk about is something called as args. So args stands for arguments that you want your methods to have, for which you need to apply your point cut expression. Now the typical usage for this is, let's say you want to apply a point cut expression for all methods that take a circle as a parameter. So in that case, you would write the circle class over here. So again, args would take class names or interfaces as parameters, and you can have multiple arguments over here. So what Spring is going to do is it's going to look for methods that match these arguments, and then if a method matches all the arguments that you've specified over here, then it's going to catch those methods, and then this point cut is going to apply for that particular method. And there are a couple more, target and this. And in order to understand that, we need to understand about proxied objects when it comes to AOP. We haven't covered that in this tutorial yet, so I'm not going to take those examples here. Again, this is something that you can refer to once you have gone through the other tutorial, which talks about Spring proxied objects when it comes to aspect-oriented programming. Okay, so now before I wind up, I'd like to tell you one particular best practice when it comes to writing point cut expressions. It's highly recommended that you use this best practice whenever possible. And the idea here is to mix and match point cut expressions and combine point cut expressions rather. What I mean by combining point cut expressions is something like this. Take the example where I want a point cut for all the getters of the circle. We've already seen how to do this. Okay, what we need to do is we need to specify the a point cut execution, and then you specify the class name dot get star, and then that will catch all the getters of the circle class. But then say you have already written code for these kind of point cuts. Now let's say you already have these two point cuts. One point cut for catching all the getters in your code, and another point cut for catching all the methods inside your circle class. So if you have these two point cuts already, then now if you have to write a point cut to cache all getters inside a circle, the best way to do this is by actually combining these two point cuts. When I say combining, you have to write all getters and all circle methods. So all the logical operations work, and or not are the common operations which we can use in order to specify these point cut expressions. Now let's say I want logging advice to run for all getters and all circle methods. So the way to do that is by using something like this: all getters and all circle methods. So what we are doing is we are actually writing individual components of these point cuts. These are the pieces that you're going to put together in order to specifically configure your point cut. So this is a very modular way of writing your point cut expressions, and this is a good practice if you have a lot of point cuts in your code, and even otherwise it's a good thing to do. You write separate point cuts which are modular, and then you combine them in your point cuts depending on where you want your advice to be applied. So I will save this and let's try to run this and see what happens. Now I'm doing a shape service.getCircle.getName. So what should happen is the logging advice should run only once, because the getter, this applies only for getters of the circle, and there's only one getter of the circle running. However, if you look at the second advice, this applies to all getters. So the second advice should run twice, because you have two getters that are getting called here. One getter is the get circle and another getter is the get name. So again, logging advice should run only once, and then the second advice should run twice. So let's execute and see what happens. There you go. Second advice has been executed once, the logging advice once, and then the second advice again, and then the actual output. So this logging advice has been called once because we have restricted it to getters of the circle. So this will not trigger the logging advice, only this will trigger it, and that's because you have done an and this advice will be applicable only if both these point cuts apply. So this way you can actually chain as many point cuts as you want, and even here you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of ways in which we can configure your point cuts.